I played one of the craziest chess games of my life recently when I took part in Anna Cramling's Squid Chess. I made it to round 2 and got to practice my poker face as I took part in an 8-player chess game where one side was only allowed to promote knights. In this video, I'll show you the game we played and highlight 5 key things to remember in your games if you're a lower rated player. For the higher rated players, there's one move in particular that I just wasn't sure of and I can't evaluate it with an engine, so let me know what you think of that. First, let's quickly cover how the game worked. We were randomly divided into teams of 4, and we alternated making moves without communicating at all between teammates. An additional rule was that my team could only promote pawns to queens, while my opponents were only allowed to promote to knights based on team names. In my match, these were the 2 teams, and you can pause the video if you want to see the players' ratings and their chess credentials. The game started off with your standard e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, very nice development, the kings get to safety, all of the minor pieces are developed, and life seems to be great. What you want to do in this position is the one piece that you still have undeveloped is your light squared bishop, so you want to make it active, and in order to do that you probably need to push your d-pawn. I breathed a sigh of relief as the person before me said the word pawn to d, but unfortunately what he carried on saying was d5. This is something that I see a lot of beginners do because they're told that they should put their pawns in the center of the board like this. The problem is they don't check that it's safe to do that. So my first tip is for any central advances, make sure that it is safe. You can do this just by doing a quick count. White has 1, 2, and 3 pieces attacking the d5 square, whereas in terms of defenders, we only have 2 defenders. There are more attackers than defenders, showing us that this is not a safe move to make. Much simpler over here was just to play d6, which is a nice calm move, and then you have this diagonal open for your bishop, and life should be great. Moving on, the game continued, so we lost a pawn, and this brings me directly to our next tip, which is do not panic when things start to go wrong. It was my turn over here, and first of all, I'm not an e5 player, so I was already unfamiliar with the structure, and secondly, I try not to blunder my pawns on move 6, so I now just panicked with a lot of eyes on me, and I opted for the move knight to a5. The problem is this is putting the knight on the edge of the board. Remember, knights on the rim are dim. You're also maybe setting yourself up for a potential fork by putting your 2 pieces like this. Sure, you can trade bishops, but you're already down a pawn, and I should have just taken stock and figured out what the best move was in this situation. Over here, a better move would be something like knight d4. After knight takes e5, for example, we can maybe go rook to e8, and if the knight goes back over here, we now have quite a lot of pressure on this pin. Maybe the c2 pawn is going to be weak if our opponent plays something like queen e1 in the future. So yeah, just a central move, which is making the best of a bad situation. The game continued, we lost another pawn, there was some crazy pawn pushes in the center, a lot of trades, and we get to a point which is quite important. So white has now just blundered, with the whole reason being that after knight takes c3, we are attacking this knight. So if they move the knight away, we can just move our knight to safety, maybe to this square. And if they decide to take our knight, then we take their knight. And if you do a quick counter material, we're now only 1 pawn down as black, and white has tripled pawns, but we are very much back in the game. What happened though is there were a series of exchanges, so the queen trade, and then the knight moved back. And this is the third tip. So after there's been a whole lot of action on one side of the board, just take a second to take stock and figure out, are any of your pieces attacked? Are any of your opponent's pieces attacked? And make sure you save that before you carry on with any other plans. Over here, h6 was played, unfortunately forgetting that the knight on c3 was busy being attacked. And then we went into a situation where we're now down an entire piece and a pawn, and things are looking quite dire. We carried on playing, fighting valiantly, not doing too badly, not dropping any more material, and eventually we got to another moment after some kingside pawn expansions. We got to a moment where the rooks are being offered for trade. So over here, it was my turn, and I sat and I tried to think, what is the best move over here? Because unfortunately, the engine evaluation says no matter what you do, you're losing, but the engine thinks that white can promote to queens. Remember, one of the rules of this game is that while black can promote to queens, white can only promote pawns to knights. So I thought trading off rooks eliminates the chance for blunders, and also then our opponent is left with a knight, a bishop, and a bunch of pawns that can only become knights. So maybe they're going to end up in a situation where they have to try and mate with a knight and bishop, and to coordinate that as 4 players could be very, very tricky, especially with some inexperienced players on the team. So I opted to trade. Let me know in the comments if you think objectively it was better to hang onto our rook and to try and win some pawns or pieces with that. And what carried on was a fairly standard endgame with some pawn advances, trades, and we started going for the pawns on this side of the board. But if we just sit and evaluate this position over here, it's not completely over. Our opponents have essentially an extra knight and a bishop. So if you think if we could trade off these 3 pawns for these 3 pawns, or something like that, and if once we've traded off those pawns, we're able to exchange our bishop for their knight, then we have a situation where our opponent has a pawn and a bishop, and unfortunately that pawn can only promote to a knight. So we will probably end up getting a draw through the 50-move rule, unless some 1300s are able to work out over the board how to checkmate with the knight and bishop. The key thing is, though, we need to hang on to our bishop in order to have chances. Unfortunately, if we trade our bishop for the knight right now and the king takes back, first of all, their king is just a lot more active than ours. And secondly, they have a bishop, we have only a king as an attacking piece. So it's going to be a lot more difficult to try and trade off pawns. And actually, we don't really have any hope of trading off the pawns. So the 4th tip that I have is avoid making exchanges unless it gives you an immediate draw or stalemate, or if it wins back significant material. I was literally sitting at this moment thinking, okay, just king g6 or bishop move anyway, just don't trade the bishop for the knight. And unfortunately, that is the move that was made. And now we are in a very unfortunate situation. We carried on playing though. We obviously had this king of stalemates on our team, so we did not give up. And our king ran to the corner, setting up our stalemate possibilities. The key being here that if white decides to take this pawn, maybe they decide they want to push this pawn and get another knight, then it is stalemate as our king has no safe squares to go to. Our opponents obviously avoided this and carried on pushing the pawn, so we just went back and forth, hanging on to our stalemating chances. My 5th tip then is to always keep your stalemating chances in mind. Our stalemating chances at the moment are king on h5 and king takes over here, or maybe knight moves, something like that, that'll just take away the squares that we can go to. Unfortunately over here, and it was more of a brain slip I think than an actual mistake, 5up I think was thinking where should the king go, and he ended up saying h5, or his mic cut out and we only heard h5, which unfortunately meant that it was a pawn move. And now our stalemating possibilities, although they still exist, they are much smaller. What followed after this was another 78 painful moves before we got checkmated on move 127 by 3 knights and a bishop. I'll let it play out to some suitable music for those of you who are interested. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.
"子供なのね夢を